The Holocaust, a human tragedy, began 85 years ago. It began with words, then bullets, then arrests, and then extermination on an industrial scale. My sister and I lived the nightmare, scared 24/7, fearing bombardments, denunciation, and starvation. I was born October 4th, 1937, and from the age of 4.5 to 8, my sister and I lived with 4 adults we hardly knew prior to moving with them. I am a living messenger and a witness of what the Second World War and the Holocaust have done to my family and to the world. My parents were born in Poland in the early 1900s. They were neighbors in a very small village called Brest-on-Bug, located in eastern Poland, which became after the war a part of Belarus. In their early 20s, still single, they decided to immigrate to France, a country known for freedom and culture. They wanted to get away from the pogroms, which is the massacre of ethnic people, in this case, Jewish people. They wanted to get away from the anti-Semitism, from the hatred, and a very bleak future. They did get married shortly after their arrival in France. My sister Rachel was born in 1932, and myself 5 years later in 1937. For 11 years, our parents lived a normal, happy life in France, in a town named Compiègne, with a population of 18,000 people, about 50 miles north of Paris. My father was a tailor and my mother a seamstress, so they designed and manufactured children's clothes, which they sold retail. World War II was declared on September 3rd, 1939, 2 days after Germany invaded Poland. And it was France and England that declared war on Germany. France formally capitulated to Nazi Germany on June 22nd, 1940, signing an armistice after 6 weeks invasion. Our lives were about to change forever. The new French government, located in Vichy, under the command of the Hitler collaborationist Marshal Pétain, a renowned and worshipped French general in World War II, issued the first, a month after occupation, the first anti-Jewish status of October 3rd, 1940, defining a person of Jewish religion. The law provided the basis for drastically reducing the role of Jews in the society. It excluded Jews from top positions in the French civil service, the army, and professions that help shape the public's opinion, such as teaching, the press, radio, cinema, theater. The status also stated that a quota system would be devised to limit the presence of Jews in the liberal professions such as law and medicine, and a few others. A second law followed on June 2nd, 1941, not even a year after the first one, tightened the definition of Jewishness and opened the way for a massive removal of Jews from commerce and industry professions. On September 1st, 1941, Rainer Heydrich, a high-ranking SS and police official in Nazi Germany, as well as one of the principal architects of the Holocaust, declared that Jews aged 6 and over must wear the yellow star. So you had a number of people in the streets, and as you cross them on the sidewalk, that you either look at them or you just went to the other side. On September 19th, let me not repeat that, a symbol of Jewish identity is actually the Jewish star that was used as a tool for persecution, humiliation, and segregation. The punishment for not wearing the Star of David ranged from severe beatings and imprisonment to immediate execution. My sister and I never wore the star. I guess we were already bad people, resistant. The French Vichy government, collaborating with the Nazis, published 28 laws reducing Jewish people to poverty, starvation, and despair. Jewish people could no longer enter a public park, a cinema, a museum, a restaurant. They were not allowed to own a radio. They were not allowed to travel. They were not allowed to move. They could not work in the administration. They could not own a business. They could no longer exercise professions such as medicine, lawyers, accountants, store owners. They could not hold gatherings. Our parents, still considered immigrants, because in those days in France, there was no legal way to become a citizen unless you knew someone who knew someone who knew someone in the administration. The fact that they lived already 11 years there, they were arrested on July 19, 1942, on a Sunday, a beautiful day, at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, by whom? By the French police, collaborating with the Gestapo, with the Nazis. I was 4.5 years old. That day is about the only memory that I have of my parents. I remember holding my mother's dress as the gendarmes were hurrying my parents down the 2 flights of stairs. It woke up our neighbors from down below, Henry and Suzanne Riboulot, and they came up, see what was happening. Our parents were pulling their hair, not knowing what to do with my sister, who was 10 years old, and myself. They offered to take care of my sister and I, not knowing that they were putting their lives in mortal danger, not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, but for 3 years. They did not know. Not only their lives, but the lives of their 2 sons, René, 20, and Marcel, 17. That day, July 19, 1942, was the last time I saw my parents, and I remember them. That morning, my sister and I went from almost normal life in hiding and fear and starvation for 3 long years. Life in Nazi-occupied France, 1940 to 1944, was characterized by severe food shortages, strict rationing, fear, and widespread humiliation. Daily life involved curfews, blackouts, and constant German surveillance. Food was scarce and rationed. Most of it was confiscated at the sources by the German army. Many evening meals consisted of bread. The bread was made by a little bit of a flour, but mostly sawdust. Dipped in a bit of milk, we were allowed for 6 people, 1 quart of milk a day that we picked up at the local farm. The Nazis rewarded people for denouncing the whereabouts. Of course, Jewish people, but not only Jewish people. Resistant fighters, Christian resistant fighters and others. Foreign parachutists who had landed in our town. Gypsies, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses with ration cards. Thus, as a result, we lived in constant fear of being denounced, as many in our town knew that the population was starving, and they knew where we were. We escaped several roundups, which would have meant deportation and death, not only of my sister and I, but of the people who were hiding us, 6 of us. The closest call came on January 19, 1944. We were saved by a coffee spill. And I don't drink coffee much, so mistake. On one of the roundups, the French driver employed by the Nazis told us after the war that he could not read our name on the lists. And we were the first people to be arrested. He could read our name, he couldn't read the address. We were the first people on the list, so the SS arrested all the others and went back to their headquarters to get our address. When they came back, we had left the apartment. By 2 minutes, we saw the truck turning the corner of our street. When the German archives were opened last to the public in April 2006, which is 60 years after the end of the war, it took 60 years for Germany to open the archives. We learned that our parents were transported in a convoy of 1,000 people, 100 per cattle car. After my presentation, I will show you a few pictures where you see the cattle car that was designed to transport 8 horses. So that after the arrestation, 10 days after the arrestation, they were sent to Auschwitz. Our mother was not tattooed. And it meant that she either died during the transport, or she was murdered on arrival. She could also have been thrown out in a fire pit, as the crematorium in those days in Auschwitz in mid-42 were not yet sufficient to process the overflow of incoming deportees. Our father was tattooed. His tattoo number was 54315. The records show that he was still alive 2 years later on September 1944. Can you imagine the torture for 2 years, starvation that he endured? After his arrival in Auschwitz, and only a few months before the liberation of the camp. Before the war, there were about 600 people of Jewish faith in our town of 18,000 people. At the end of the war, my sister and I were the only Jewish people remained in Compiègne the duration of the war, out of 600 people. I'm here with you today. November 1st, 1944, one of my happiest, memorable day of my life. The 28th Division of the American Army liberated our town. Church bells were ringing fiercely all over town. Everyone was in the streets welcoming the American soldiers, black and white. They were giving us chocolate bars, egg powder, chewing gum. I've never seen a chewing gum in my life. I was 8 years old. So someone told me not to swallow it. I was 7.5 years at the time. The war lasted another 6 months, ended on May 8th, 1945. 4 long years of hell had ended. My sister Rachel was 13 and I was 8. We had survived some of the darkest days of human history. We waited, of course, for the return of our parents with great expectation. It took a long time. It took a long time to accept that we would never see them again. I have missed them all my life to this day. In 1959, at the age of 20, I was drafted in the Air Force to serve for 2.5 years in a long French-Algerian war. I immigrated to the United States in February of 1964 with my first wife. She was pregnant, and our 18-month-old son, and less than $500 in my pocket. After I bought a 1956 Mercury for $150, I paid for the first month's rent, $150, and 1 month security. I had $50 to feed my family. I still stay in constant touch with Papa Henri and Maman Suzanne Riboulot and their descendants. In fact, that this May will be there in about a month. Patricia and I will be hosting a memorial for Papa Henri and Maman Suzanne, the Christian family that saved our lives at the risk of their lives and their sons' lives. In 1977, they were awarded the Writers Among the Nations status, which is the highest honor given by the State of Israel. A writer is a non-Jewish person or a non-Jewish family at the risk that has saved a Jewish person or Jewish family at the risk of their own lives without any material compensation. A tree was planted by Henry and Suzanne in the garden of the writers at the Mount of Remembrance, at the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem. World War II, Holocaust, was the genocide of 6 million people of Jewish faith, perpetrated by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Jewish people and many others were considered subhuman, Untermensch in German. Hitler and his demented followers, it's interesting, Hitler and his demented followers with a powerful army, 14 million soldiers, 14 million soldiers over a period of 4 or 5 years, at the cost of 270 billion US dollars in 1940 value, which corresponds to about $3 trillion in today's money. Some people, it's over that. With diabolical intentions, failed. Once more, and that is very important as we live today. In the history of the planet, and fortunately for humanity, goodness triumphed over evil. But despite the relatively recent tragedy of World War II, too many on this beautiful earth, and if you have traveled a little bit around the earth, you know it's a beautiful earth, still deny or pretend to deny the Holocaust, which is a very well-documented tragedy. I am a living witness of that tragedy. As we continue to live today in a very turbulent and uncertain world, we should wonder, we really should wonder, if humanity has learned anything from history. Obviously, our elected officials do not read history or have not read history. Racism, anti-Semitism, and religious hatred are still present today. Question is why? And I'm 88 years old. I'm asking that question several times a day. Racism is based on the idea that there are different races, human races. The white race, the red race, the black race, and the yellow race. The Nazis believed that people were to be divided into races, and some of these races needed to be exterminated. Jane Elliott, an American anti-racism educator, showed that the classification in human races into different races is wrong. There is only one race, the human race. There is only one race, the human race. We cannot be silent. Our educators, our religious leaders, and our elected officials must remind us the tragic events of World War II and its sequels. We must be reminded of the catastrophes due to racism, anti-Semitism, death, religious hatred, and wars. They have brought what they have brought. Death, havoc, and misery to so many innocents and their families for centuries, Some of you here are and will be teachers, politicians, influential citizens. Please use your influence to not repeat the terrible mistakes of the past. Read history. Every human being in this world aspires to achieve a great state of being, such as peace, freedom, and happiness. Elie Wiesel, a Nobel laureate and the author of 57 books, said, just as a man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. Just as a man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. Hope is what has sustained Jewish people through more than 2,000 years. Hope lets us believe that no matter how dark the world seems today, it will be better tomorrow. It can be better tomorrow. An estimated 70 to 85 million people of all religions perished during World War II. What did it represent then? 3% of the 2.3 billion humans on Earth at that time. 3%. Just today, the population of the Earth is over 8 billion people. It was then only 85 years ago, 2.3 billion. We must never forget the millions of people, women, children, adults, who underwent immense suffering and death during World War II. We must not forget them. Never again. This term is associated with the lessons of the Holocaust. Never again is a vow by Jews made in the shadow of the Shoah, of the terrible, terrible situation that happened during the war. It's a vow to ourselves and to our children and grandchildren that we will do everything in our power to prevent another Holocaust, and the Holocaust to happen again. It is a slogan waiting to be repurposed into lessons about tolerance of human rights. As long as I live, I will never forget this heroic Christian righteous among the nation's family, Henry, Suzanne, René, and Marcel Leblot. They saved my sister Rachel and me from certain death at the risk of their own lives for 3 terrible, dreadful years. Because of their courage and their compassion, I'm here with you today. I hope that writing, talking about my personal experience during World War II, especially in nowadays troubled times, and related events that took place some 80 years plus ago, events that could have annihilated the world, will contribute to a better world. Thank you very much. I would like to show you a few pictures of my town and of the people, my parents. I don't know if you can hear me here. In the meantime, prepare your question. So in the meantime, prepare your question. Yes. Oh, that's another book. So let me try to explain in a brief time here. So what happened is that we were, of course, waiting for the return of our parents. Anytime, any day, any minute, there will be a knock on the door and they will be there. Well, they never came back. We never heard that knock. So what happened is that we did hear a knock, and it was my uncle and my aunt. My uncle was the brother of my mother, and my aunt was the sister of my father. So they came and they claimed we didn't know these people. In those days, we didn't have any telephone or anything like this. Communications was very sparse. So they were very unhappy because Papa Henri said, no, we cannot let the children go. We promised their parents that they will be there when they came back. And we just don't know you. The children don't seem to know you either. So they went back very unhappy. And a week later, as I was coming out of school, my uncle tried to kidnap me. So he was pulling me by one arm towards the truck or something. And then my sister, who was in a different school, because in those days, boys and girls were in different schools, she ran to me and she pulled me by the other arm. So extended, so I don't have long arms, but I could. So I just kicked my uncle in the chin and he released me for a second. So we went home and we explained the story to Papa Henri and Mama Suzanne, and they were shocked, of course. So they said, well, they didn't want to go to the police because we didn't trust the police. The police, they had collaborated, they were collaborators. Even the Germans were not there anymore, but still we didn't trust them. So I said, well, let's go and see the mayor. The mayor happened to be the Baron of Rothschild, who had lived in Compiègne a long time, and he was the mayor. And he said, well, you should go to the police. And, but I understand why. So why don't you just send the children to my home, which was a little castle in the middle of the forest with servants and so on. So we spent 2 months there. It was great. We didn't go to school. And we were just served like princes and princess, prince like and princess. So when we came back 2 months later, they had started they went to court. My uncle and aunt went to court, and the judge decided that we should go and live with my uncle and aunt, which was really a catastrophe because we didn't know these people. And to me, at the age of 8, from 4.5 to 8, the people that saved us were my parents. So now we'd been separated from our parents. Now we're being separated from our second parents. So I lived with these people, my uncle and aunt, for 4 years. Very unhappy. After 2 years, they decided to send my sister to the US because we had an aunt who had come to the US, and my sister didn't want to leave me. She was like my mother, my third mother. That she was 15, I was 10. So but she had no choice. She had to leave me. And after 2 years, I didn't speak to my aunt and uncle because they separated me from whom I considered my parents for 2 years. And at the end, I heard that I gave them I was at the time 12 years old, such a hard time that they decided to put me in an orphanage. So I decided I won't go for an orphanage. So I prepared tents made out of whatever so that I could go into the forest and so on. And then I had this idea that I was going to do something a little bit smarter than escaping and going and live in the forest. So I went to see the person who was in charge of the Jewish community. Mr. Zilberberg was his name. And he said, Léon, just don't do that. You don't want to have, the police will find you and something will happen, whatever. So he said, let me talk to these people, to Uncle and Aunt, and with the help of the community. But most of the Jews had been arrested, and so there were maybe around 15, 20 people. And about a week or two later, my uncle and aunt were asked to go to that meeting. And when they came back, and they said, you can leave now. And the next day, I left. And so I had enough money for the train to go back to Compiègne, which was about 50 miles away. So I lived with my parents, my second parents, for 7 years until I was drafted in the Air Force to fight another war. So that's. I think I answered your question. You had a question? No, someone. No. Okay. You have to be careful. Oh, you did. Okay. So, good question. It's another book. So I reconnected my sister. I did not hear my sister's voice for 13 years. We didn't have any telephone in those days. Okay? I forgot to ask you to turn your telephone off and take it as a compliment that we have a progress in human life. So 13 years later, she got married in the meantime. We had 2 children. So she came with her husband, just her and her husband, to Compiègne. And the first time that I saw my sister in 13 years. And they convinced us to immigrate to the United States. I was finished with my studies and so on. And I had a very good job, actually, that I was assured of a lifetime job with Michelin tires. Yes, but I didn't like the smell of rubber. So it took 7 months, actually, to get all the paperwork done. But we came to the States in 1964. And I lived in New York for 12 years. Yeah. So that was it. So is it working now? Okay, good. So let me talk about. Okay, so this is a map of France for those who don't know where France is. Okay, this is the trajectory from Compiègne to Auschwitz. It's almost 1,000 miles, and it took in those days about 4 or 5 days. In July, in overheated cattle car with no air practically, there was just a window on top of the car. I will show you the cattle car in a minute. Okay, this was in 1940. The railroad car in the back is where the First World War armistice was signed, and the Second World War was going to be signed the next day. The person that you see on the right is Hitler. The person deep in is Heydrich. He's the one who was the architect of the Holocaust. And the person in front of Hitler is I don't remember him, but he was, I'm sorry. Yes, that's what he was. That's right. And at that meeting, he gave the order to destroy our town. Why? Because Hitler was a soldier, just a simple soldier during World War One, and he never understood why Germany capitulated in 1918. So he was very upset with the previous government and whomever did capitulate. So he just he was out for revenge. So we are going to see our town after a week later that you see him. And I was about 5-10 miles away from him at the time. That is our town after the bombardment. And the steeple that you see is not a church, it's actually a town hall. If you have ever, you're probably to go to France, Paris, it's only about 40 minutes away by train to our town. It's a beautiful town. Of course, it's been reconstructed since. This is the main street here. Our apartment buildings where we lived was on the left, maybe 50 yards away from those people there. On that street there. And that's the bridge that was destroyed as well. It's my mother. Wasn't she beautiful? She was 29 when she died, murdered. That's my father and my uncles. My father has the hat. That's the day there on their wedding day. With the exception of the two people, all these people died murdered in Auschwitz. My father and my mother with my sister in the garden, they were so elegant. And I show this picture not to show how beautiful I was, but simply for you to realize that you are a parent and someone, the police comes, pick you up, and you don't know when you're going to come back and why you are being picked up in the first place. Can you imagine that? And then being in a camp, you don't know what happened to your children. This is my mother with me in Compiègne. That's the building where we lived. We lived way on top. It was the cheapest rent there. This is the cattle car, a typical cattle car that was designed specifically to carry 8 horses. 100 people. There was no room to sit. There was no room to lay down. 4 or 5 days. Temperature was probably in the 90s. No hygiene, no water, no food, no air. 30% average of the people died during the transport. That window here still exists, and that's where I saw the first American soldiers at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the night before liberation. We recognized that they were American because they had rubber shoes, rubber soles. That's my sister and I. My sister's still alive. She's 93 years old. And this morning, in fact, that if you have an opportunity to look at ABC tomorrow, I mean, what do you say? Yeah, ABC, the view. She's going to be there tomorrow. Yeah. So I spoke to her about 2 hours ago, and she was finishing dancing. She dances the tango, Argentinian tango specialty, on 5-inch heels. And I run circles around her with my bicycle. This was done on Easter Day, probably in 1943. That Papa Henri to the right, and next to him, Maman Suzanne, and these are 2 friends from Paris. It's me when I was in the Air Force. That is the Embassy of Israel in Paris. It's the Ambassador of Israel giving them the medal, the recognition for having saved 2 Jewish kids at the risk of their own lives without any material compensation. That is one of their sons, Marcel, on the right, and that's my sister in the middle, Maman Suzanne, and myself. That's Papa Henri and Maman Suzanne in the town there. That is the steeple of the town hall that you saw in a destroyed town. And that's where the mayor resides. And he dedicated a street in the town to Papa Henri and Maman Suzanne. That is the famous lie. No, every people has such a lie in that position. Arbeit macht frei, meaning that work makes you free. In this case, is that horrible work makes you dead. That is the entrance of Auschwitz, and that is the crematorium, and that is the oven. And imagine 1 million people died in his ovens. And that is the bedroom. 6 people had to be in there. This year, the ashes of close to 1 million people. Patricia and I saw that, and we had no idea what it was. And it's just horrible, horrible. Can you imagine the ashes we put there? Imagine it. That's where the wife of the commander used to amuse herself by putting deportees with German Shepherd dogs, without feeding the dogs for several days. She also took the skin of deportees and she made lampshades. Yes, we need to remember those. History can repeat itself for sure. It could happen again. And we say never again.